So every time we use employee engagement, we put the light on another person, not the managers. So let's start talking about management performance and capability, because then the light is back on them.
This is the vinJones Podcast, Secrets of the Engaged Employee, with Kevin Jones of vinJones.com.
So today is going to be a fabulous day. When I was growing up, in high school, somehow we got on the kick of whenever you see a raccoon, it was going to be a good day. And I don't know how that came to be, but if we saw a raccoon, it was a good day. And living in the northwest of the United States, there are a lot of dead raccoons on the road. So we had many, many good days. But there's also another reason I'm going to have a good day. It's because I'm talking with Jennifer Frahm. And that just automatically makes it a good day as well. Raccoons and Jennifer, that not to compare you to, but I don't want to do that because you look nothing or sound nothing. Well, I don't even know what a raccoon sounds like, but it's a good day no matter what. So thank you so much for being on this podcast. I appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here. Raccoon or not.
Yeah. Yeah, not in this case. So Jennifer and I have spoken a few times in the past, and her experience is quite. It's I was going to say quite a depth, quite a breadth, but that doesn't even make sense itself. You have quite a breadth of experience in change management and helping organizations just become better overall. So if you would tell us a bit about you, your background, and what you're doing now, and what you're excited about.
Sure, happy to. So I guess the high-level headline, if you like, is that I'm an organizational change and communication practitioner. I work with organizations, whether they be corporates or non-profits or state government, to bring in change, and usually with the view of creating sustainable change in the organization. My background is I started off in marketing and communications and stumbled into the space of organisational change. I then went and got my academic qualifications. I've got a PhD in management. And my PhD I looked at, it was really born out of my practice experience in that from a practice perspective, all of the theory out there about just communicate the change wasn't working in organisations which had such massive volume of change coming through. So I was really interested in organisations that undergo continuous change and what are the communication models that support that, which led me, it was a really natural transition then into the world of social business, because 10 years after that PhD and looking at communication models that enable continuous change, we see the rise of technology, enterprise social networks, Yammer, social media, all these things which are really strong about dialogue and collaboration, which were really hallmarks of what enables continuous change. So I'm incredibly fortunate. I work with companies both in change projects. I work with executives from a coaching perspective. I like to describe myself as a bit of a change ninja. So when I'm in organizations, I'm not on the front stage. There are no black pajamas, but...
Oh. I was looking forward to seeing that, but that's okay.
And but really, I work in the background of organisations going through big change, and how we can create that as a capability for the organisation, not just land the change.
Sure, continuous change. Is that every company now? I mean, maybe it wasn't 15, 20 years ago where a lot of companies were stagnant, but I can't think of an industry or a company now that's stagnant at all, and there is continuous change. So I think your focus is in something rich right now.
Look, I think there's three ways to look at that definition. I think the first is we hear more now about the notion of agility, and that organisations need to be agile to be responsive and competitive. And so I think that is the great example of continuous change in organisations. That's the really positive view of continuous change. I think you then see organisations who are not agile at all, but are continuously bringing in relentless change to fix stuff without actually fixing anything. So
Right.
you don't see the positive outcome of continuous change there. You see change fatigue and exhaustion and waste of resources. Got the third view of it, which is a lot of our small to medium enterprises. They are quite stagnant. There are many
Mm.
that just do not embrace change. And for virtue of some of the characteristics of their industries, they actually don't need to. So I think there's a caution there with thinking, the Me Tooism, that everybody else is changing, I need to as well. Because you've got to be really clear about what your strategy is. And there's a lot of businesses that don't need to change.
So let me ask, definition of change, because I think I was thinking something different in that definition of change than you were, because I even see the small to medium businesses needing or changing all the time as well. So what is your definition of change in this?
My definition of change, that's such a good question because it changes.
Of course, the nature of it. Yeah.
Look, I think change for me is any time that a person needs to do something substantially different in their organization. So that could be a new role, it could be new processes, it could be new beliefs, it could be new ways of behaving. But for me, or to adopt, a new business strategy, that is change for me.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what we're talking about, where you see small to medium enterprises as needing to change, maybe this is the nature, the difference between Australia and North America.
Sure.
So Australia, they're very isolated. It's not like small to medium enterprises are competing with a big competitive space.
Good point.
So, for a lot of those small businesses, until they actually start getting impacted by global competition, they don't need to change. And just the sheer remoteness of Australia to the rest of the world means that there is a natural protective barrier there.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense. Yeah, because I've got my, more U.S. centric view, having, grown up here as well. But what I'm also finding is that there are many companies in the U.S. and elsewhere as well that aren't changing but need to change. They're completely resisting that change, and it almost drives me batty to think that you've got to do this, and it's almost like they have blinders up and they don't want to see what's actually happening. Are you finding that too?
Look, it's not so prevalent in Australia, I don't think.
Okay.
I think when we talk our large organisations, no, I think there is a much stronger understanding, whether they like it or not, they have to change.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand where it comes from in terms of it's that fight, flight, freeze reaction.
Sure.
And
Yep.
that sometimes the prospect of changing is so terrifying that it's easy just to freeze, and analysis by paralysis, or paralysis by analysis, and stay stagnant that way. I kind of get it. If you don't have people in there making sense of it in a way that reduces the fear, they're not going to move.
Yep, I agree. Now you have your PhD in management, and you're mentioning, and I have a master's, and I learned quickly that what I was being taught is not as relevant as they thought it was. And I tried a number of times to start pointing that out, and I know it turned on deaf ears. How long ago was it that you got your PhD? Or should I ask that?
It was 2004, 2005.
That's great. And have you seen the changes since then?
Oh, look, such a fresh example for me. In that, so I was teaching at the University of Melbourne up until about 2007, 2008. And I was lucky. I was in a really progressive department. And it had a very strong industry focus. So I look back on that time and I'm still confident that what I taught was of value to my students, particularly my MBA students. Recently, I did a short stint and did some relief teaching in another university towards the end of last year, and they sent me all the materials. And so, what's this, 7 years later, I'm looking at all these materials and I was like, I remember some of these models and I remember teaching some of this, but I can't teach this now. This is rubbish. It has absolutely nothing to do with what we experience in change as change practitioners, and it will be of no merit to these students. So
Wow.
that's only 6, 7 years. And I went, wow, if this is what we're still teaching in universities, what a waste of money. It was
Wow.
really quite confronting. Now, really lucky in that the university gave me freedom to completely throw it out and start again.
Very
Um,
good.
and that was really exciting because I could actually teach a course with the benefit of understanding the theories that support my practice, but
Mhm.
also introduce the practical tools and frameworks that are actually what's necessary to know about managing change. So, that was a good experience at the end, but it was really confronting to see that.
No kidding. And I've often wondered about that because I wonder these younger people that are coming out of school, getting their bachelor's and master's and learning about business, and I'm learning that they are learning some of the things that, yeah, I'm glad you learned that, but that's not the way we operate. That's not the way life is these days, and there's a big discrepancy between the two. I don't know that we can do anything about it, but it just is what it is. I think it's just moving faster than they can keep up, probably.
Yeah, I sort of walked out that and I felt, wow, there's really opportunity to do master classes now for academics, which is, industry practitioners like yourself, myself, go in and go, okay, here's what's really happening.
Sure.
Um, and because whilst there is often industry participation on curriculum boards, they're often really senior level executives who, again, are not the practitioners.
Right.
And that's what I think is missing. There could be a really nice bridge there if senior practitioners came in and worked with academics around what's real.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. All right. So I want to get into a little bit of a controversial subject here, which might actually be really, really good. I'm actually excited to talk to you about this. So for our listeners, Jennifer wrote a post that talks about why the term employee engagement needs to die. And I read that and I loved it. Now, I shouldn't be saying that because my tagline that I'm using right now is Secrets of the Engaged Employee, which goes against what I just said. So that doesn't make sense. However, you're right on. And what I love about it even more is that it was written 5 years ago. It wasn't even it wasn't a recent piece at all. So tell us why you feel the term employee engagement needs to die.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to be mindful here. A couple of reasons. I think focus is so important in achieving goals and outcomes in the things we do. And what we choose to focus on really matters. The root cause of problems with employee engagement, in my view, is poor management capability. So while the discourse is centered around the employee, you're not focusing on the management. And it kind of feels like there's this whole industry, an extraordinary effort and money being spent on employee engagement, where if that could be redirected to building management capability, all of a sudden you'd have really engaged employees. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first issue I have with it. It's around where is your focus in terms of where are you putting your interventions? Because at the moment, if you think of a ratio of 1 to 10, you're putting your effort and interventions on thousands of employees when you could have 100 managers. So for me, it doesn't make sense. The second, and this is interesting to explore again from a national cultural perspective.
Okay.
There seems to be an implicit assumption that employee engagement is necessary to ensure that our employees use their discretionary effort. And that is the hallmark of good employee engagement. And for me, that feels incredibly manipulative and lazy from a business strategy perspective. If you are dependent on your employees doing more for less pay, then you've got your strategy wrong, your product wrong, your pricing wrong. The whole model is wrong, and it's exploitative and it's manipulative. Those employees who offer discretionary effort are awesome, and then they're your stars, and that's exceptional, and that's something to be really celebrated, but it shouldn't be taken for granted. And a lot of the discourse I see around employee engagement is around how to create more employees doing more for less. And I just think reeks of a wrong business strategy. So that's probably the two reasons that fired me up.
I love that. I do. I think you are so spot on with each of those. And I want to take the first one, your first point right out of the gate, that the focus is wrong. And I'll tell you kind of my perspective of where I've seen this go. And this may be a nationality thing as well. I don't know. But what I'm finding is that I started focusing a few years ago on changing management itself. Gary Hamel, if you know him, and I'm sure a lot of listeners know Gary Hamel, he focuses a lot on, well, getting rid of management. I mean, if you read a lot of his stuff, it has to do a lot with just getting rid of management. And I was working with him on some things together. And I found I remember sitting in in one of his keynotes, and it was awesome, and everyone was being blown away. It was so good, and I remember the guy in front of me just saying, "Wow, that's awesome, that's awesome." And at the end, he turned to the person next to him and said, "But we could never do that." And it's true. I mean, you go from where most companies are to such a radical change, and you can't even make the mental leap to get there. And then all of a sudden I realized, maybe if we focused on something else, we can affect that change in a different way. And so honestly, that's the way I'm taking it. When I talk about employee engagement, it is really, I hate to say this, it's a backdoor to changing management. Because once we start talking about what employees need, then we realize that the model today can't deliver that. And so it has to come from a change within the management. And so, again, it's more of a backdoor way to do it. And the reason I'm using the term employee engagement. But are you finding kind of the same thing, that it's difficult to approach that subject head on and have people, some people won't even take that topic seriously?
Yeah, look, no, I think, well, all the organizations I've been in, they just sweat bullets about the employee engagement scores. There's such energy into how do we lift our engagement scores. And inevitably the interventions are very close to the survey. It's whatever's going to cause a spike. And I think the fear or not, the trick we're missing is because we're not calling it out as it is and saying, right, we're not doing another employee engagement survey at all. It's over. What we're really interested in at the moment is improving management capability. It's kind of like when you use a language that obscures what the issue is, it loses its power. So if we actually were courageous and we went forward and said, we have to lift our management capability, that's what we're now interested in. That's what we're coming to talk to you about. And your capability is not sufficient for our organisational performance. I reckon you'd see a lot better results really fast, because I just think employee engagement hides the issue whilst we talk about engagement. So you'll have managers who won't show up to an employee engagement briefing, right? Because that's not so important to them. If you had briefings which was around management performance and capability, I think they'd be showing up because that's about them. So every time we use employee engagement, we put the light on another person, not the managers. So let's start talking about management performance and capability, because then the light is back on them.
So I'm finding a little bit different, and this is a really great discussion. I love a different viewpoint than mine. I certainly don't want the same and everyone just to agree and say, oh yes, of course. I love the differences here. What I'm finding is that when we talk about management capability, managers say, oh, another one of those discussions or another one of those classes or workshops or whatever. Yeah, I've been to a million before. I'm tired of it. Don't need it anymore.
Okay. There is, again, there'll be a national cultural difference in this.
Sure.
So, as I understand it, North America has had management in the curriculums, from an education perspective, and has a much bigger industry around MBAs and all that kind of stuff. So, there's a fair chance your audience have heard a lot of this kind of stuff. We had a really important study done, I'm going to say, mid-90s, I can't remember, the Carpin report, which looked at what the state of management capability was in the country and what the problem was with lifting that. And, that it wasn't in our TAFE systems, and we didn't have university curriculums that taught management and all that kind of stuff. I went back and so we must have just had the 20-year anniversary, or I think it must have been, and they revisited and they went, nothing's changed. So I would argue that your audience probably is a lot more familiar with the concepts of good management than our managers in Australia. Our managers in Australia get promoted by virtue of tenure,
Gotcha.
Not by virtue of management experience. And that's, I don't want to do a disservice to a lot of the managers I work with. I work with extraordinary managers, but I'm talking in general if you look across the Australian landscape. What's interesting then is in your observation, if you have an audience who is actually familiar with these principles, so they've heard it all before, what is the barrier to them practicing it? If you have the information,
Right.
why do your managers not? What is the barrier to practice?
Right. That's a great question. And honestly, it's so varied. Yeah, but you're right on. You're right. What is the barrier? So many people understand, but I think again what they understand is the traditional way, the traditional view of good management. It's not the new view, and I'll say new view, but in the same breath, it's a lot of the same old view as well. But employees now are expecting different things. It's not the same that they expected even 10 years ago. But they're being taught in college and in other, and really when they come out of college and into business, they see that this is the norm and they're starting to conform to the norm rather than lift it up to where it needs to be. And so that's personally what I'm seeing and why they're not getting to that degree. And it's sad, but it's just kind of how it is. You kind of have to conform sometime when you get to management.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, what was the book? Was it the E-Myth? The E-Myth, Gerber's E-Myth. Back again, I'm thinking this is a late 90s book, and it's been the E-Myth revisited, and it looks at the 4 profiles of people who move into management, being technical or entrepreneur, or I can't remember the other 2. And I found that really insightful, because when I look around at a lot of managers and organisations I work with, they are technicians. They've got this fantastic technical skill,
Right.
but then they're expected to manage without the support
Right.
structures around that. I've also seen companies who do an exceptional job at building management capabilities. So
Yes.
that
Agreed.
is out there, and I've worked in those organisations, and it's seriously exciting to see how they're building those programs.
Yep.
And surprise, surprise, when they do employee engagement, it goes up,
Imagine that. So your second point there, trying to squeeze more out of the employee for less, is so spot on. And when we think of productivity, I mean that's the essence of productivity. We're trying to make our employees more productive, aka make them work longer. Try to force them into policies and procedures that just crank it out, not really thinking about the person, that they're actual person coming to work. But I lost my train of thought there for a sec. But really, when we talk about more for less, are you finding that is still within the culture that you're in, that it's more of a regulated, trying to get everything down to the minute, procedural type thing, trying to get more out of the employees?
Look, that hasn't been my experience in the organisations I've worked with most recently. I've certainly been in organisations where that is the case. Some of the organisations that I've worked in recently have really strong elements of high trust cultures.
Very good.
That said, even in a high trust culture, their view with employee engagement is we need to get a much higher percentage of people really engaged because they will do more for less. So
Sure.
it's this implicit bias, even in high trust cultures, the view where, which is not you've got to be here at this hour and you've got to do this much and all your KPIs and stuff like that, where it's underpinning their assumptions around the way they do things. So, I just think when we start looking at working with them, as from managing with strength-based leadership and, working with our people so that they're working in flow, all those kind of concepts, you get engaged employees,
Right.
And that's kind of cool and it's natural, but it probably depends also, I think, in thinking this through, it depends on the industry base that you're looking at too.
Sure.
As
Agreed.
to the degree of industrial management, what you're talking about, the whole scientific management view, as to how much that is actually deployed in the organization.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Employee engagement is a byproduct of something better. It's not really something we should focus on to say, here's a employee engagement program. There may be some of that, but really it comes from other change, and it just kind of falls out and happens rather than trying to force it.
Yeah. And I think that there is a real risk too, and I get concerned about organizations who are striving for, 85% employee engagement scores and 70% and even above 70, having everybody highly engaged. I think what they're doing is they're setting themselves up for failure really fast. In that if I and that many of my colleagues are this committed to this organization and so engaged, it creates an enormous sense of ownership of the organization. And if the decisions are not distributed, if the decisions are being made by an executive group, really fast, you can make that highly engaged group of employees incredibly cynical, and they will
Sure.
turn on you. So
Yes.
it's kind of, you don't want to get people too far engaged, because if you're not a participative democracy, that cohort is going to swing against you and feel really betrayed with some of your decisions.
Yeah.
So I think there's a risk in it too that we need to acknowledge.
Good point. Very good point. Now,
Probably making sure I'll never get work in Australia now for the next, 20 years.
well, I hope not. I hope that just makes it even better.
This is one of my most career-limiting interviews ever.
Sorry, maybe we'll edit that part out.
Don't you dare. I'm committed.
Good for you. Now, before, when we were getting ready, you were talking about surrender and your thoughts around that word and how it plays into the workplace. Explain that to us, if you would, please.
Sure. Okay. So when typically we look at change frameworks, one of the really popular ones is the awareness, understanding, buy-in, and commitment curve. The commitment curve around change comes from Daryl Connor's work. And so what that says is, to get people to be committed to change, we take them through 3 phases first. 1, they have to be aware of the change. 2, they have to understand the change. 3, they have to buy into the change before they'll be committed to the change. What I find, and what is common within change practitioners, that it can often be a struggle to move people from understanding to buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
So logically, we get it. I understand everything you've told me. I'm aware of what's happening. But for me to feel it and want to do it is often a massive chasm that we have to get across. And it's really difficult. Now, about a year ago, I had some pretty serious hip surgery. Didn't go so well. And I had to change a lot of things about my lifestyle to get through this period of time. And it wasn't massive change, but they were little changes, diet, exercise, mindset, all those kind of things, beliefs.
Sure.
Exactly the same as we ask our people in organizations to do day in, day out. Not massive changes, just little changes.
Yeah.
And I was really resisting these changes, and I was resisting my new world massively.
The person who creates change in others is resisting change herself. That's good. Well done.
Yeah, I know. I was aware of the irony, but I was struggling to move through it. And so the parallels with our organizational world were really strong for me. It's like, oh, okay, I'm really resistant. They're really resistant. And I ended up, one of the sort of the transition points for me was delving deeper into mindfulness and meditation. And I was only doing that for pain management, really. I was like, quick, give me another tool at the moment. And so I explored that from a pain management perspective. But in the process of that, got to get really familiar with the concept of surrender. Now, when it was first mentioned to me, I was horrified. So surrender means you're giving up, waving the white flag.
Right.
We've got the surrender wife movement going on, which I'm like so not buying into that.
Right.
Surrender has these really strong religious connotations. I'm a committed pagan. That's not going to work for me. So every which way I looked at the word surrender, I was like, nah, not buying that.
Right.
And so I had to really think more about this concept of surrender, and where I came to a point, and it was really around the role of sense, and that if we think about circuit breakers with our stress, so when we're really stressed, we go to the beach so we can feel warm sand between our fingers.
Sure.
We go and spend 3 hours doing a slow cooked ragu because you're chopping and, all this amazing sense that's going on around you, and it helps you cut the anxiety and the stress. And so for me, the notion of sense as a circuit breaker through surrender became really powerful. It wasn't until I could actually surrender could I move through to this more positive outcome and move past my resistance. And so there are a number of tools I used around that space of surrender. So that's in my personal life. And I'm thinking, well, okay, if surrender actually has an incredible strength and power in helping me transition through this change curve, how could we employ that in our organizations? What does does the awareness understanding need a surrender phase before you can get to buy-in? Are we missing out a stage there on the curve?
Okay.
And what do we do to help our people move through that phase of surrender so that they can actually buy into the change? And so that's the piece that I'm really interested with at the moment. And I don't have the answers,
Still exploring it.
Yeah, I'm exploring it. And it's interesting. I think one of the things that I'm seeing, I don't know if it's happening over there, is there's this real rise of interest in mindfulness in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So organized meditation groups or just thoughtful reflection, this kind of thing. And again, a lot of it is pitched around employee engagement. So we're doing mindfulness so that the employees, have got this nicer work-life balance, et cetera, and feel healthier. And I'm wondering, what if organizations that embrace mindfulness are actually better at change? All of a sudden, we start to have a business reason. We have a business case for mindfulness in our work. Because if we could look at, does it correlate that organizations that embrace mindfulness are naturally more agile because they move through awareness, understanding to buy-in much faster than organizations that are not looking at mindfulness in the workplace? Just a thought. Don't know.
Yeah. That's a very good thought. So can you give me an example, a business example of someone going through that process, through that change process, and hitting the surrender, and what does that look like for them?
Oh, such a good question. Um,
And if you don't have the answer, that's okay. But
I think what it looks like is the employees or the managers have the ability to be aware of what the change is, understand what the change is, be mindful of the impact that that's having on their body and how they actually feel about that,
hmm,
to explore what it is that would help them think, think about that in a stronger way. Um, and again, that's still done individually. So I guess that's what I'm struggling with is what does the organizational intervention look like? Do we
sure,
bring whole teams into a room and, we're going to do a guided meditation, which will take you through, I don't know. And that's the bit I'm struggling is what's the organizational intervention which permits the stage of surrender? Don't know.
right. Because I do think, you bring up a really good point, because I see so often that we do go through this change process and it's reactionary, and we hardly think about what is going on or why we need a change. We just know change, nope, I'm fine, want to keep going. And we don't take that time to just stop, think about it, and see how it's impacting us and those around us. And that thoughtful time, the time that I love, every year we go to the beach and we spend a week at the beach, and I take a morning or an afternoon and I leave and I go out by myself on the beach somewhere just in silence and just think, and wow, the insights that come are incredible. But in business, to take time like that seems like a waste of time. I mean, traditional management would say that is a waste of time.
Look, yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the things I feel really strongly about is it's really, and this will perhaps sound counter to our previous conversation, in that it's really easy to blame the managers for what's going on in our employees' worlds.
Right.
It's really easy, you know, everybody squeezes the managers. But in the next breath, we give them no space to reflect. We give them no
That's
space
right.
to process. They're getting pushed from on high, they're getting squeezed from below,
Mm-hmm.
and we just physically cannot make decisions. If we're making that velocity of decision making, something gives. We're going to get some of those decisions wrong, and they're going to have negative impacts on our employees or negative impacts on our customers. We give our managers no space to reflect. That's seen as really problematic in organizations.
It is. I've always, well, I don't want to say always have said, but even more recently say even more, that managers have a really tough job. And we've created the role of management, and it's, I don't want to say impossible to do really well, but almost, because of everything that they're juggling, like you said, all the pressures from the top and the bottom and everything that they're given. Wow. It's a huge burden, really.
It's superhuman what we
Yes.
expect managers to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So, in wrapping up, what challenge could you give the listeners here that would help them in their business life and even personal life?
Yeah. Okay. So my challenge to listeners is to help me out with what does this organizational intervention look like? And I don't know whether they want to contact you and, or whether there's room for comments on the podcast or something like that. But
Yeah,
I would love it if your listeners could come back to us and say, here's how I think surrender could play out in my organization during change. What does it look like in a real, practical, tangible sense?
great. So there is the gauntlet has been thrown down. Let's figure out what this means and what this looks like, and how we can all use this. I like that. That's very good. And I'll put in the show notes, I'll put links to your website as well and links to your contacts. So if anyone wants to, they can just contact you right off and have a conversation with you straight.
Fantastic. Yeah, sounds great.
Good. Well, thank you so much for your time. What a great conversation. I really appreciate the time. Thank you.
And look, we've got no raccoons, but we do have a cat that has been very keen to be in Frahm the whole time.
I love it. And I'm surprised one of my children haven't run by as well. And so there we go.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Why spend 10 hours a day doing work you only tolerate? The more engaged your team is, the more productive they will be. These are the secrets to helping them love their work. Learn how to love your work and create an engaged workplace. Visit vinJones.com.